here's a little bit of background. The economy has stalled, growing less than 1% per annum over the past decade. At 32%, unemployment is rampant, and so is poverty, crime, and corruption. Inequality is also rising, and living costs are high. Not just that, the rand has been the worst performing major currency since President Cyril Ramaphosa took power in 2018. Public finances are also squeezed. South Africans here have endured almost daily blackouts after decades of underinvestment in dilapidated power plants, while road, rail, and port infrastructure are collapsing. So it's no wonder then that as we approach the May 29th election, the ANC's rule and a second term for President Ramaphosa are under threat. We've been taking a look at opinion polls. They're suggesting the party could lose its parliamentary majority for the first time. And a record number of political parties are contesting the upcoming elections. I think last time I counted, it was upwards of 380, but only a handful are serious challengers. The main opposition, Democratic Alliance, and several smaller rivals have established a business-friendly bloc aiming to form a coalition government. Then there's also the left-leaning Economic Freedom Fighters, which has steadily increased its share of the vote. The big unknown, though, is the newly formed MK party backed by former President Jacob Zuma. And as the politicians campaign, it's ultimately going to come down to the 28 million registered voters to determine South Africa's future. That is why we are focusing on it today. That is the context, and there's a lot to unpack. So let's unpack it now, unpack all of it now with our team covering the election in Cape Town and also here in the economic hub of South Africa, Johannesburg. We are joined by Bloomberg's Ntando Takwana and also John Viljoen, who is in Cape Town with us. John, Ntando, thanks so much for being here. John, let's just start with you. You are our markets editor in Cape Town. You've been paying close attention to what the markets are doing leading up to this election. I mean, how are they performing leading up? Is the anxiety already being felt, or are we still seeing investors really sitting on the sidelines right now?
Yeah, morning, Jennifer. Well, South African assets have actually done quite well recently. In April, the South African stock market rose for the second month in a row, and actually what came close to having its best month since November. And the rand was one of the best performing emerging market currencies. So those were positive signs, but it's also clear that investors are watching news flow around the election very closely. Bank of America does a monthly survey of fund managers here. And in the latest one, the risk of a shift to the left in government policy came out as the top risk, the biggest single risk identified by fund managers. And investors are also keeping a close eye on those opinion polls that you mentioned. In the latest major poll on April 26, it was interpreted by investors as being a market-friendly indicator, and the rand performed very strongly on that day. So I would say there's calm in the markets for now, but definitely some anxiety lingering in the background.
Yeah, it's always calm for now. We never really know where the rand is going, right? Let's bring in Ntando. She's sitting right next to me. Ntando, John was just going through a lot of the different scenarios that investors are planning for. I mean, what is this level of uncertainty really going to mean for this economy that's already been struggling, as we mentioned, post-May 29th?
Well, Jen, the financial markets have never had to deal with this level of political uncertainty that we're seeing now over the past 30 years. And it's given rise to economic uncertainty as well about what kind of government we will see at the end of on the other side of the May 29 election. And Moody's Investors Service yesterday saying that the emergence of a coalition government will likely mean that the implementation of key reforms that are currently taking place will slow down. And that's not good for a country that really is desperate to implement those key reforms. We've got a logistical crisis and an energy crisis that needs a decisive government to deal with those issues. We've got an employment crisis. We've got a growth, an economic growth crisis. And the longer those remain a problem and they aren't resolved, the longer the credit worthiness of South Africa is a problem. So those are the key uncertainties that people are worried about.
John, give us your insight too, because you're down in Cape Town. You speak to a number of investors as well as Ntando. I mean, is all of this uncertainty really creating a lot of concern for investors post-election, or are they just waiting for May 29th to really make any sort of definitive move one way or the other?
Yes, it's all going to come down to how those votes stack up. If we avoid the scenario of an unpredictable coalition government, things could be quite positive. That Bank of America survey I mentioned earlier, for example, showed that 70% of the fund managers that they spoke to here in South Africa actually expect a rally in the South African shares after the election. For the rand, the election is obviously a huge risk event. That a shift to the left in policy could be very bad news for the currency. On the other hand, if we avoid that scenario, that could be positive. Either way, it comes down to how the votes stack up. For example, yesterday, strategists at Credit Agricole said that they are quite positive about the rand for the rest of the year. But just given how close it is to the election and the uncertainty of the outcome, they are staying on the sidelines of the market while they monitor the news flow.
And Ntando, just really quickly, I mean, what do you think is maybe the biggest risk scenario here come May 29th?
I mean, the best scenario is a scenario where the ANC remains the main policy driver. But there are scenarios where, say, for instance, it falls to 40%. Then there's a real risk that it has to bring in a party that has a bit of heft. And that's going to mean that we're going to see a lot more policy changes that are going to have a bearing on the management of public finances. So either the ANC manages to remain the policy driver and we won't see any big shifts, or it needs just a little bit to help it reach over 50% to form a coalition government, and even in that instance we won't see a huge policy shift. But in the instance that it does show a dramatic drop, then we do face a risk of it having to tap for someone much bigger and someone who maybe would challenge them for key posts maybe, or key areas that is probably not aligned with the ANC's ideologies and its main and current policies.
Of course, and that gets to the point where people are concerned that nothing's going to get done, right? Because there's a lot of political infighting. We have to leave it there. Bloomberg reporters John Viljoen out of Cape Town and, of course, Ntando Tukwana here in Johannesburg with me. Thank you both so much for joining us.